A missing woman's body may be on display at a world-famous exhibit. The chilling connections to political power and corruption in China make this one of the most disturbing true crime stories ever told. Welcome to today's episode of True Crimes Unfold. Please note that events and scenarios in this video may be graphic for some viewers. Discretion is advised. Details of the videos are taken from actual case files. Before we begin, let us know in the comments where you're listening from, what type of cases you'd like us to cover next, and we'll make sure to add them to our list. And don't forget to subscribe to get new stories as soon as they're released. Now settle in, get ready, and let's begin. A world-renowned exhibit, a missing pregnant woman, a web of corruption. Could one of the most macabre displays in modern history be connected to the disappearance of a woman in China? This is the story that will chill you to the core. In 2006, Zhang Weiya, a 29-year-old schoolteacher from Dalian, China, vanished without a trace. Zhang was 7 months pregnant at the time and had been living a quiet life, preparing for the birth of a child. She had no known enemies, no history of mental illness, and no apparent reason to leave her life behind. Zhang was last seen leaving her apartment complex, wearing a flowing maternity dress and carrying a small purse. Her family described her as excited about the impending arrival of her child, making her disappearance all the more baffling. Her family immediately reported her missing, and local authorities launched an investigation. Flyers with her photograph were plastered across the city, and her husband made emotional pleas for her return. Despite their efforts, no substantial leads emerged. As weeks turned into months, the investigation into Zhang's disappearance stalled. Her case was quietly closed, with officials citing a lack of evidence. But for those who knew her, the lack of resolution left an aching void and troubling questions. Years later, whispers of a horrifying possibility began to surface. In a traveling Body Worlds exhibit featuring plastinated human remains, attendees were struck by one display in particular: a plastinated body of a pregnant woman, her abdomen sliced open to reveal her unborn child. The lifelike preservation was both fascinating and grotesque, raising the question: who was she? Body Worlds, created by German anatomist Gunther von Hagens, uses a process called plastination to preserve human bodies for educational purposes. However, the origins of some of these bodies have long been shrouded in controversy, with accusations of unethically sourced remains, particularly from China. Rumors began to circulate that the pregnant body in the exhibit bore a striking resemblance to Zhang Weiya. The timing of her disappearance, her physical characteristics, and her pregnancy aligned eerily with the display. The exhibit's plastination process was known to have ties to a facility in Dalian, the very city where Zhang disappeared. The facility had been authorized to use unclaimed bodies from local morgues, raising further suspicions about the origins of the exhibits. Zhang's case reopened in the minds of many, but the answers remained elusive. The potential connection between her disappearance and the plastinate body brought to light chilling questions about ethics, human rights, and corruption. While no definitive identification was ever made, the possibility that Zheng's body had been plastinate and displayed without her family's knowledge sent shockwaves through the community. Critics pointed to systemic corruption and a lack of oversight, particularly in regions like Dalian, where the powerful held sway over life and death. The era's political climate, dominated by the ambitious and controversial figure, Bo Xilai, added another layer of intrigue. Efforts to investigate the facility and its practices were met with silence or resistance, leaving many to wonder who was protecting those involved and why. Zhang Weier's disappearance was more than a personal tragedy. It became the seed of a far-reaching mystery that would expose the hidden dealings of powerful individuals. As whispers of her fate intertwined with rumors of political corruption and human rights abuses, the story became larger than one missing woman. It became a symbol of how power and secrecy can obscure even the most horrifying truths. To understand how a missing pregnant woman could vanish into thin air and possibly end up as a gruesome exhibit, we must unravel the web of power and corruption that enshrouded Dalian during the time of her disappearance. At the center of it all, a man whose ambitions knew no bounds. During the early 2000s, Dalian, a major port city in Liaoning province, was undergoing rapid development. Bo Xilai, an ambitious and charismatic politician, served as the city's mayor before climbing the ranks to become governor of Liaoning province. His tenure brought modernization and international recognition to Dalian, but at a hidden cost. Bo was known for his transformative projects, including sprawling industrial zones and glitzy urban developments. He positioned himself as a reformer who could bring prosperity to the region. Dalian's rise under Bo's leadership earned him a reputation as a political star, paving the way for his eventual role on China's powerful Politburo. Beneath the glossy exterior of Bo's achievements lay allegations of corruption, abuse of power, and human rights violations. Critics accused his administration of silencing dissent, manipulating the legal system, and exploiting vulnerable populations for political and economic gain. Among Dalian's modern developments was a plastination facility operated by a German-Chinese joint venture. This facility, which supplied preserved human bodies for the controversial Body Worlds exhibit, would later become a focal point of speculation in Zhang Weier's disappearance. Located on the outskirts of Dalian, the plastination factory was one of the largest in the world. It sourced bodies from local morgues, claiming that all specimens were unclaimed and acquired legally. However, human rights activists raised concerns about the true origins of the bodies, particularly given the facility's proximity to prisons and detention centers where political dissidents and marginalized groups were often held. The facility operated with little oversight, protected by powerful allies within Bo Xilai's administration. Attempts to investigate its practices were often stonewalled, fueling rumors about unethical sourcing. One of the most striking exhibits to emerge from the factory was the plastinate body of a pregnant woman. The display, which toured internationally, became a grotesque centerpiece of Body Worlds. Its eerie resemblance to Zhang Weier raised questions about whether her fate was tied to the facility. The culture of fear and control that permeated Dalian during Bo's tenure created an environment where people like Zhang could disappear without explanation, and where questions about the plastination facility were met with silence. Bo's administration was infamous for its heavy-handed tactics. Dissidents and journalists who spoke out against the government faced imprisonment or worse, creating a chilling effect that silenced potential whistleblowers. Bo's wife, Gu Kelai, was a high-profile lawyer and businesswoman with significant influence in Dalian's elite circles. She would later be implicated in the murder of Neil Haywood, adding another layer of intrigue to the city's dark secrets. Against this backdrop, Zhang's disappearance was more than a tragic anomaly. It was a reflection of a system where the vulnerable could be exploited and discarded without consequence. As rumors about the plastination facility spread, questions arose about how a missing pregnant woman could end up as part of its gruesome exhibits. The connection between Zhang's disappearance, the plastination factory, and Bo Xilai's administration became a chilling topic of speculation. Activists speculated that Zhang's pregnancy might have made her a target for the plastination facility, given the rarity and macabre allure of a plastinate pregnant body. Some questioned whether her disappearance was facilitated, or at least ignored, by authorities operating under Bo's administration. The lack of transparency surrounding the plastination facility and its ties to powerful figures in Dalian suggested that her case might have been deliberately covered up. The intersection of Zhang's disappearance, the plastination facility, and Dalian's political climate raises more questions than answers. How could a pregnant woman vanish in a city teeming with development and surveillance? What role did Bo Xilai's administration play in shielding the truth? And most hauntingly, was Zhang's fate tied to the ambitions of those in power? As we unravel this dark web further, we turn our attention to the downfall of Bo Xilai and his wife, Gu Kelai, a political scandal that shook China to its core and may hold the key to understanding what happened to Zhang Weier. The disappearance of Zhang Weier was not just an isolated tragedy. It was part of a much larger and more sinister story. At its center was a couple who ruled Dalian with unchecked power, Bo Xilai and Gu Kelai. Their ambitions brought wealth and prestige to the city. But behind the scenes, their reign was marked by corruption, betrayal, and murder. Bo Xilai had long been a star in China's political firmament. Charismatic and ambitious, he climbed the ranks of the Chinese Communist Party, moving from mayor of Dalian to governor of Liaoning province, and later becoming a Politburo member and party chief of Chongqing. Bo was widely regarded as a future contender for the highest echelons of power in China. Known for his populist policies and anti-corruption campaigns, Bo gained national fame for his so-called Chongqing model, which emphasized economic development and social reform. However, his methods often relied on fear, propaganda, and a strong hand, with many critics accusing him of authoritarianism. Beneath the surface, Bo's administration was rife with corruption. From Dalian to Chongqing, his allies and associates benefited from under-the-table deals, while dissenters were silenced or disappeared. While Bo Xilai dominated public life, his wife, Gu Kelai, was a force to be reckoned with behind the scenes. A high-profile lawyer and businesswoman, Gu was instrumental in managing the family's finances and maintaining their grip on power. Gu cultivated relationships with wealthy and influential figures, both in China and abroad. She managed the family's substantial assets, which were allegedly funneled into overseas accounts through a network of shell companies. One of Gu's key connections was Neil Haywood, a British businessman who acted as an intermediary in the couple's financial dealings. This relationship, however, would prove to be their undoing. In November 2011, Neil Haywood was found dead in a hotel room in Chongqing. While the official cause of death was initially ruled as alcohol poisoning, rumors quickly spread that Haywood had been murdered and that Gu Kelai was responsible. Haywood and Gu had reportedly clashed over financial disputes. Haywood allegedly demanded a larger share of the profits from their dealings and threatened to expose the family's corruption. According to court testimony, Gu invited Haywood to Chongqing under the guise of resolving their dispute. There, she laced his drink with cyanide, killing him in cold blood. The murder was initially covered up by Bo Xilai's administration, but cracks in the facade began to show. Wang Lijun, Bo's police chief and trusted ally, attempted to investigate the case independently, leading to a dramatic falling out with Bo. The murder of Neil Haywood set off a chain reaction that ultimately led to the exposure of Bo Xilai and Gu Kelai's corruption and the unraveling of their power. In February 2012, Wang Lijun fled to the U.S. consulate in Chengdu, where he reportedly sought asylum and revealed evidence of Gu's involvement in Haywood's murder. This dramatic defection brought the scandal to the attention of China's central government. In the months that followed, Bo Xilai was removed from his position as Chongqing party chief and expelled from the Communist Party. He was later arrested and charged with corruption, bribery, and abuse of power. Gu Kelai was tried and convicted for Haywood's murder, receiving a suspended death sentence. During her trial, she admitted to the killing, but claimed it was driven by a desire to protect her son. The fall of Bo Xilai and Gu Kelai revealed a culture of impunity and corruption that had permeated their administration. As details of their crimes emerged, so too did questions about other potential abuses of power. Questions that cast a new light on the disappearance of Zhang Weier. During Bo's tenure as mayor, Dalian had become a hub for controversial projects, including the plastination facility. The connections between the facility, Zhang's disappearance, and Bo's administration became a chilling topic of speculation. The couple's exploitation of their wealth and power raised suspicions about how far they might have gone to protect their interests, and whether Zhang's disappearance could be tied to the systemic corruption they oversaw. As the scandal surrounding Bo and Gu unfolded, activists renewed their calls to investigate the plastination facility in Dalian. Could the same culture of impunity that enabled murder and corruption also have allowed a pregnant woman to vanish? While no direct link between Bo and the facility was proven, the climate of secrecy and fear during his tenure provided fertile ground for unethical practices. If Zhang's body was indeed plastinate and displayed in body worlds, who authorized it? Was it an isolated act of exploitation or part of a larger system of human rights abuses? The fall of Bo Xilai and Gu Kelai was one of China's most significant political scandals, exposing a dark side of power that continues to cast a shadow over Dalian. For Zhang Weier's family, the revelations only deepened their search for answers, and their fear that her disappearance may never be fully resolved. The connections between Zhang's disappearance, the plastination facility, and Bo Xilai's reign of corruption are chilling. But how does a missing woman become part of a world-famous exhibit? In the next part, we investigate the controversial history of body worlds and the unsettling questions it raises about ethics, exploitation, and the value of human life. Body Worlds is known as a groundbreaking exhibit of human anatomy, drawing millions of visitors worldwide. But beneath the scientific and artistic veneer lies a dark history of ethical questions, disturbing practices, and allegations of exploitation that could hold the key to understanding Zhang Weier's fate. Body Worlds was founded in the late 1970s by Gunther von Hagens, a German anatomist who pioneered the process of plastination, a technique that preserves human bodies by replacing water and fat with plastic polymers. The resulting exhibits showcase preserved cadavers posed in lifelike positions, offering an unprecedented look at human anatomy. Von Hagens positioned Body Worlds as an educational initiative aimed at fostering public interest in science and health. Exhibits traveled to major cities around the globe, drawing both acclaim and controversy. From the beginning, questions were raised about the sourcing of the bodies, while von Hagens claimed that all specimens were donated willingly. Reports suggested that some bodies may have come from questionable sources, particularly in China. A key element of the Body Worlds controversy is the connection between von Hagens and the plastination facility in Dalian, China, the same city where Zhang Weier disappeared. The Dalian plastination factory became a major supplier for Body Worlds exhibits. It was touted as a state-of-the-art facility capable of producing high-quality plastinate specimens on an industrial scale. The facility sourced many of its specimens from local morgues, with officials claiming that all bodies were unclaimed and acquired legally. However, human rights activists questioned these claims, pointing to the lack of transparency and oversight. Critics allege that some of the bodies used in the exhibits may have been those of political prisoners, detainees, or marginalized individuals whose deaths were never properly investigated. One of the most striking and controversial displays in the Body Worlds exhibit was the plastinated body of a pregnant woman. Her abdomen was dissected to reveal the fetus inside, drawing both fascination and outrage. The pregnant woman's body bore a haunting resemblance to Zhang Weier, who disappeared in Dalian while 7 months pregnant. The timing and location raised unsettling questions about whether the body could be hers. Activists argued that even if the woman's identity could not be confirmed, her display raised broader ethical concerns. Did she consent to be plastinated and exhibited? And if not, how did her body end up on display? In response to criticism, von Hagens maintained that all specimens in Body Worlds were ethically sourced and properly documented. However, he admitted that some bodies acquired in China were returned after questions arose about their origins. As public scrutiny of Body Worlds intensified, journalists and human rights organizations launched investigations into the sourcing of its specimens. Their findings painted a troubling picture. Investigators found evidence that some bodies used in the plastination process had been provided by Chinese authorities. The lack of transparency made it difficult to verify whether these bodies were unclaimed or if they had been taken without consent. Reports suggested that some bodies may have belonged to political prisoners, including members of persecuted groups like Falun Gong practitioners. This added another layer of complexity to the controversy surrounding Zhang's potential connection to the plastination facility. Attempts to investigate the Dalian facility and its practices were often met with resistance. Activists who raised questions faced intimidation, highlighting the risks of exposing the truth in a politically charged environment. The ethical debate surrounding body worlds goes beyond Zhang's case, raising fundamental questions about the treatment of human remains. Critics argued that the plastination process should be held to the highest standards of consent and transparency. Without clear documentation, the risk of exploitation looms large. While Body Worlds was marketed as an educational exhibit, some questioned whether it veered too far into the realm of spectacle, commodifying human bodies for profit. Despite its success, the exhibit's legacy remains tarnished by allegations of ethical violations. For families like Zhang's, the unanswered questions about their loved ones add a deeply personal dimension to the debate. Zhang Weiyer's disappearance and the pregnant woman's plastinated body remain circumstantial connections. However, the parallels between her case and the broader controversies surrounding body worlds cannot be ignored. If the plastinated body is not Zhang's, who was the woman on display? And if Zhang's body was not plastinated, what happened to her? The lack of transparency in Dalian during Bo Xilai's administration raises the possibility that Zhang's case and others like it were deliberately concealed. While no definitive evidence links Zhang to body worlds, the possibility that she, or someone like her, ended up as part of the exhibit is a stark reminder of the potential for abuse when power goes unchecked. The body worlds controversy highlights the need for greater accountability in the treatment of human remains, particularly in regions where systemic corruption and human rights abuses create opportunities for exploitation. As we move closer to unraveling this chilling mystery, we turn our attention to the broader implications of Zhang Weiyer's disappearance. What does her story tell us about the value of human life in the face of power and ambition? And how can we ensure that no one else suffers a similar fate? Zhang Weiyer's case and the controversies surrounding it raise haunting questions. What happens when power is unchecked? How can exploitation thrive in the shadows of secrecy and privilege? This part delves into the broader societal and moral implications of a world where lives can vanish and potentially be commodified without accountability. At the heart of Zhang Weiyer's disappearance lies a recurring theme: the exploitation of vulnerable individuals. Whether through political corruption, systemic abuse, or the commodification of human remains, this case shines a light on the ways in which the marginalized are often the first to be exploited by those in power. Zhang, like many others in Dalian, was part of China's vast population of migrant workers who moved to urban areas seeking better opportunities. Despite their critical contributions to these cities, they often live on society's margins, lacking access to robust legal protections or safety nets. This lack of protection makes them easy targets for abuse, exploitation, and, in Zhang's case, disappearance without consequence. The plastination controversy underscores how, even in death, the marginalized can be exploited. Bodies sourced from vulnerable populations, whether unclaimed or taken without consent, raise ethical concerns about dignity, respect, and consent. The combination of political power, corruption, and secrecy in Dalian created an environment where such exploitation could flourish. Without transparency or accountability, abuses of power were allowed to go unchecked. The potential connections between Zhang's disappearance, the plastination facility, and Bo Xilai's administration highlight how corruption can create a system where human life is devalued. During his tenure, Dalian was transformed into an economic hub, but this rapid development came at a human cost. The culture of fear and control fostered by Bo's administration created a climate where voices of dissent were silenced and accountability was nearly impossible. Operated under the radar, the facility became a symbol of unchecked power. Allegations of unethical practices, including the sourcing of bodies from vulnerable populations, raise questions about how deeply systemic corruption enabled its operations. Zhang's case is not an isolated incident. Reports of other disappearances, unethical sourcing of human remains, and the commodification of vulnerable individuals reflect a broader pattern of exploitation that extends beyond Dalian and China. For families like Zhang's, the pain of a missing loved one is compounded by the lack of closure and the possibility of exploitation. The inability to find answers leaves a void that no amount of time can fill. For Zhang's family, the years since her disappearance have been marked by grief, frustration, and unanswered questions. The possibility that her body could have been plastinated and displayed without their knowledge adds another layer of trauma. Families of the missing often face immense challenges in seeking justice. The stigma of marginalization, combined with systemic failures and political resistance, makes it nearly impossible to uncover the truth. Zhang's story resonates with families worldwide who have experienced the loss of a loved one to systemic abuse or exploitation. Her case is a stark reminder of the human cost of corruption and secrecy. The intersection of Zhang's disappearance, the plastination process, and the body world's exhibit raises profound ethical questions about the treatment of human remains and the responsibilities of those in power. One of the central ethical issues is consent. Were the individuals plastinated for body worlds exhibits truly aware of how their bodies would be used? And if not, what does this say about the value placed on their dignity? The use of human remains for educational purposes is not inherently unethical, but when it becomes a for-profit enterprise, the line between education and exploitation becomes blurred. Does the display of human bodies for public consumption cross that line? The lack of transparency surrounding the sourcing of bodies for plastination underscores the need for stricter regulations and oversight. How can such practices be allowed to continue unchecked, particularly in regions with histories of systemic abuse? While Zhang's case is rooted in the specific context of Dalian and Bo Xilai's administration, its implications extend far beyond China. It raises questions that resonate on a global scale about power, exploitation, and the value of human life. Activists have used Zhang's story to call for greater transparency in industries that handle human remains. This includes stricter documentation requirements, independent oversight, and accountability for facilities like the one in Dalian. The case highlights the broader issue of systemic inequality. and the ways in which marginalized groups are disproportionately affected by exploitation. Efforts to protect these communities must go beyond individual cases to address the root causes of their vulnerability. For many, Zhang's story serves as a wake-up call to the dangers of unchecked power and the need for vigilance in protecting human dignity. It is a reminder that the value of a life cannot and should not be determined by wealth, status, or political influence. Zhang Wei's disappearance remains unresolved, but her story has become a symbol of the fight for justice, transparency, and accountability. For her family and countless others, the search for answers continues. Activists and human rights organizations have renewed calls to investigate the Dalian plastination facility and its practices, as well as the broader culture of corruption that enabled such abuses. While Zhang's case has yet to be fully resolved, it has inspired a global conversation about ethics, exploitation, and the importance of protecting the vulnerable. Her story serves as a catalyst for change, ensuring that the abuses of the past are not repeated. As we reflect on Zhang Wei's story, we are left with haunting questions. How do we value human life in a world driven by power and profit? And what can be done to ensure that no one else suffers the same fate? In the final part of this series, we explore the lasting impact of this case and the lessons it holds for all of us. Zhang Wei's disappearance, the controversies surrounding body worlds, and the shadow of political corruption have left an indelible mark on how we perceive power, ethics, and humanity. Her story is not just a mystery, it's a mirror reflecting the systemic failures and societal values that allowed such horrors to unfold. What can we learn from her tragedy, and how do we ensure her legacy brings about meaningful change? Zhang Wei's case stands as a chilling reminder of the vulnerabilities that arise when human dignity is overshadowed by power, profit, and secrecy. While her story is deeply rooted in the political and societal climate of Dalian under Bo Xilai, its implications are universal. Cases like Zhang's reveal a global pattern of exploitation where marginalized individuals are disproportionately affected by systemic corruption and unchecked authority. The controversies surrounding body worlds highlight the need for global standards in the treatment of human remains, ensuring that dignity and consent are prioritized. The struggle to uncover the truth about Zhang's fate underscores the fragility of justice in environments dominated by fear and control. Her case serves as a stark reminder of the importance of transparency, accountability, and advocacy. Zhang's story has sparked international conversations about ethics, human rights, and the responsibilities of those in power. It has become a rallying cry for activists demanding systemic reform and protection for the vulnerable. For Zhang's family, the search for answers remains ongoing. Their pain and determination reflect the broader fight for accountability in cases of exploitation and abuse. Human rights organizations have used Zhang's story to push for investigations into the Dalian plastination facility and similar operations worldwide. Their efforts aim to uncover the truth about Zhang's fate and prevent future abuses. The body world's controversy has prompted calls for stricter regulations on the sourcing and use of human remains. Activists argue that transparency and consent must be non-negotiable in any endeavor involving human bodies. Zhang's family continues to demand answers, refusing to let her case be forgotten. Their resilience serves as a powerful reminder that justice is not just a legal outcome, it's a moral imperative. Zhang Weih's story raises profound questions about the value of human life and the ways in which systems of power can dehumanize and exploit the vulnerable. To honor her memory, we must confront these uncomfortable truths and work toward a more just and equitable world. Every individual, regardless of their social status, deserves respect, dignity, and protection. Zhang's story challenges us to examine how societal systems often fail to uphold these principles. Cases like Zhang's highlight the importance of vigilance in identifying and addressing abuses of power. From government oversight to individual advocacy, we all have a role to play in preventing exploitation. The secrecy surrounding Zhang's disappearance and the operations of the Dalian plastination facility underscores the need for transparency in all systems, whether governmental, industrial, or social. While Zhang's fate remains uncertain, her story has left a lasting impact on the global conversation about ethics, human rights, and justice. Her legacy is one of resilience, advocacy, and the pursuit of truth. Zhang's case has inspired a new generation of activists fighting for the rights of marginalized individuals and demanding accountability from those in power. The controversies surrounding her disappearance and the plastination industry have led to renewed efforts to implement stricter regulations and ensure that human dignity is never compromised. Zhang's story reminds us of the importance of remembering those who have been silenced. By keeping her name alive, we honor not only her life, but also the lives of countless others who have faced similar fates. Zhang Weih's story is both a tragedy and a call to action. It challenges us to confront the systems that allow exploitation to thrive and to advocate for a world where every life is valued and protected. Her disappearance may never be fully explained, but the lessons it holds are clear. We may never know the full truth about what happened to Zhang Wei, but her story has revealed a deeper truth about the fragility of human dignity in the face of power and corruption. It is up to all of us to ensure that her legacy is one of change, justice, and hope for a better future. Thank you for joining us on this journey into one of the most haunting and mysterious cases of our time. Let Zhang Wei's story remind us that behind every statistic and headline is a human life, and that it is our collective responsibility to ensure no one is forgotten.